The Montana sun was bleeding out across the valley, setting the tall grass on fire. Emma pushed the cabin door shut, the sound a dull thud in the heavy summer air. In her apron pocket, a small weight, a secret she'd stitched together in the dead of night while her father snored off the whiskey, and her mother's cough echoed like a ghost in the next room. She told herself it was just for air, a walk to the creek, but her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat that knew she was lying. Her boots kicked up little puffs of dust as she walked the track toward the cottonwoods. The handkerchief in her pocket was just a piece of old flour sack. The stitches were crooked. The wildflower she'd worked in blue thread was clumsy, bent at an awkward angle. It was nothing, and it was everything. Every stitch held a hope so fierce it scared her. Her mind, as it always did, went back to spring. She'd been at the creek, fetching water, when her shoe slipped. The current snatched it, pulling it away faster than she could think. And then he stepped out of the trees. Hank. He moved without a sound, wading into the cold water, his long arm reaching. He'd caught the shoe, held it out to her. Their eyes met, hers wide with shame, his as deep and unreadable as river stones. He gave a single nod, put the shoe back in her hand, and disappeared. Not a word. But Emma couldn't forget it. She saw him in town sometimes, tall and quiet, with his sun-bronzed skin and hair that brushed his shoulders. People gave him a wide berth. They whispered. They feared him. But Emma saw something different, a quiet dignity, a loneliness that felt just like hers. She'd wanted to thank him properly, to give him something, but the words always tangled in her throat. So she'd sewn the handkerchief, a foolish, worthless gift. But it was all she had. Now she was walking toward his camp, her heart about to beat its way out of her chest. The cottonwood grove rose up ahead, dark against the dying sun. And there he was. He lay stretched out on the grass, hat tipped over his eyes, his chest rising and falling in the slow, steady rhythm of sleep. She froze. Turn back, her mind screamed. Turn back now. But her feet kept moving, silent as a deer, drawing her closer. She stopped a few paces away and just looked. In sleep, the hard lines of his face were gone. He looked younger, almost vulnerable. Her hand trembled as she pulled the folded cloth from her pocket. She knelt in the grass, her heart pounding so loud she was sure it would wake him. For one long second she hesitated. Then, her fingers moving like they had a will of their own, she laid the handkerchief in the grass beside him. She didn't speak. She didn't make a sound. She just left her small, stitched confession and fled. Her face was on fire. She didn't dare look back. Long after the sound of her frantic footsteps faded, Hank opened his eyes. He'd been awake the whole time. He'd heard her coming, the light, careful tread so different from the clumsy stomping of the townsfolk. He'd known it was her. He'd stayed still, giving her the cover she needed. Now he pushed himself up. His gaze fell on the small square of cloth. He picked it up, turned it over in his rough hands. The stitching was a mess. The wildflower was crooked. But there was a care in those threads, a tenderness no one had ever shown him before. He sat there for a long time, the creek whispering secrets nearby. Then he folded the cloth, twice over, and slid it into the leather pouch at his hip, right next to his flint and steel. The barest ghost of a smile touched his lips. The girl had left more than a handkerchief. She'd left a question he couldn't ignore. He would carry it in silence, until the time was right. Life in the Callahan cabin was a slow grind. Her mother's cough got worse. Her father drank more. And Emma worked until her bones ached, just trying to hold it all together. The memory of that evening was a secret fire she kept burning inside. It was foolish, she told herself. Childish. But it was warm. 3 mornings later, she stepped onto the porch and saw it. A bundle tied with a leather thong. She unwrapped it. Inside were sprigs of yarrow and wild mint, still fresh with morning dew. Her breath caught. These were healing herbs, the kind her mother used to brew before the sickness took her strength. She looked around, her heart thumping. The yard was empty. The road was silent. It had to be him. It could only be him. She clutched the bundle to her chest and rushed inside. She brewed the tea, the sharp, clean scent filling the stuffy cabin. Her mother drank it, her face twisting at the bitterness. But later, the rattling in her chest eased, just a little. For the first time in weeks, she slept for more than an hour at a time. Emma sat by her bed, smoothing her hair, a single thought echoing in her mind. Hank. 2 days after that, another gift. A small pouch of seeds, beans and corn, the hardy kind that could grow in their poor, dusty soil. Tears stung Emma's eyes. She held the seeds in her palm, little promises of a future she hadn't dared to dream of. She kept the secret locked tight inside her. That night she pulled out more flour sackcloth. She thought the first handkerchief was gone forever, lost to the wind. So she began to sew another one. This time her stitches were straighter, the wildflower less crooked. She didn't plan to give this one away. No, this one was for her, a secret comfort she could hold on to. She tucked it deep into her apron pocket. It was a promise to herself. She'd see him in town, and their eyes would meet across the dusty street. A current would pass between them, unspoken but as real as the ground under their feet. He wouldn't smile, not really, but his gaze would linger for a heartbeat too long. And that was enough. It was more than enough. But the town started to notice. The whispers began in the mercantile, sharp and ugly. That Callahan girl making eyes at the Apache. Shameful is what it is. Emma's cheeks would burn hot. She'd duck her head and hurry away, but the words followed her, sticking to her like burrs. That night, her father's fist slammed down on the table, rattling the tin plates. His eyes were red-rimmed, his breath sour with whiskey. "You stay away from him, Emma," he growled, his voice a low threat. "I won't have my daughter shaming this family over the likes of him." Emma froze. "I haven't done anything." "Don't you lie to me," he roared, his face twisting. "I see how you look at him. You think I'm blind?" Her mother tried to quiet him, a weak, rasping sound from the bedroom. He waved a dismissive hand. "You hear me, girl? No more." Emma stared down at her plate, her heart a cold stone in her chest. She didn't say a word. She couldn't. But inside, a tiny flame of defiance refused to be put out. The next morning, a new gift was on the porch. Not herbs this time. Not seeds. It was a small carved bird, whittled from a piece of cottonwood, its wings outstretched as if in mid-flight. It was so beautiful, so delicate, it made her ache. She hid it in her pocket, her secret treasure. But her father saw the bulge in her apron. "What's that?" he demanded, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. Before she could answer, he snatched it from her. He stared at the little bird, his face turning a dark, mottled red. It wasn't just anger, it was something else. Something that looked like fear. "Trinkets," he spat. "Indian curses." And with a sudden, violent motion, he threw the bird into the dirt and brought his boot down, smashing it into splinters. Emma cried out, a raw, wounded sound. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in like talons. "I warned you, Emma. This is what comes of it. Filth. Stay away from him, or I swear to God, I'll take a horsewhip to you both." He stormed off toward town, leaving her staring at the splintered wood, her tears turning the dust to mud. It wasn't just about the whispers. It wasn't just about shame. Her father was truly, deeply afraid of Hank, and she had no idea why. The heat of August baked the valley dry. The creek shrank to a trickle. The dust was everywhere, a fine gray powder that coated everything and made her mother cough until it sounded like her lungs were tearing apart. The herbs Hank left helped, but they weren't a cure. They were a comfort, nothing more. Emma knew her mother was slipping away. She walked the mile into town, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, and went straight to Dr. Graham's office. He didn't even look up from his papers. "Miss Callahan," he sighed, "we've been over this. I can't extend any more credit." "She's worse," Emma pleaded, her voice trembling. "Please, just one more visit." He finally looked at her, his eyes cold behind his spectacles. "Medicine costs money. My time costs money. I am sorry for your mother's ailment, but charity doesn't pay my bills." She left his office with her hands empty and her heart full of despair. The walk home was a blur of shame and fear. That night her father sat on the porch, a bottle dangling from his hand. "She's not gonna make it," he slurred, not looking at her. "There's nothing we can do." There has to be, Emma whispered, her fists clenched at her sides. He gave a bitter, broken laugh. With what? We're done for, girl. This town, this whole damn valley, it's forgotten us. No, she said, her voice suddenly clear and hard. Not yet. A new terrifying idea had taken root in her mind. I heard Mrs. Larkin in town. Carlson's looking for a new maid. Her father's head snapped up. His eyes for the first time were sharp and sober. Carlson? Absolutely not. He pays well, Emma pushed on, her heart hammering. Enough for the doctor. Enough for medicine. You don't know what you're saying, he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. That man doesn't hire help, Emma. He buys souls. You go up to that ranch, you'll be his property. A cold dread washed over her, but she stood her ground. If it saves Mama, I'll do it. No! He lurched to his feet, slamming the bottle against the porch rail. It shattered, glass skittering across the boards. I forbid it. I won't let you go to him. You can't stop me, she cried, tears finally breaking free. She's my mother, too. The cabin door creaked open. Her mother stood there, swaying, holding on to the frame for support. She was pale as a ghost, her breath coming in shallow rasps. Stop, she whispered. Don't. Fight. Emma rushed to her, holding her up. Her mother's skin was burning with fever. Emma, don't throw your life away for me. I'm not, Emma sobbed, pressing her face into her mother's thin shoulder. I'm saving yours. Her mother tried to speak again, but a racking cough seized her. When it finally passed, she looked past Emma, her eyes locking with her husband's. She said nothing, but her gaze was a command, a desperate, silent plea. Let her go. 2 mornings later, before the sun had even touched the horizon, Emma was gone. She walked north, away from the town, toward the shadow of the ridge where Carlson's ranch spread out like a blight on the land. The house was huge, 2 stories of dark timber and glinting glass windows. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress. Carlson was waiting on the porch. He was a thick, barrel-chested man, his vest straining at the buttons, his mustache stained with tobacco. He smirked as she approached. So, you're the Callahan girl, he drawled, his eyes crawling over her in a way that made her skin feel thin and cold. Heard you were desperate. Emma lifted her chin. I'll work hard, sir. All I ask is pay for the doctor. He let out a low, oily chuckle. You'll earn what I decide you've earned, girl. You'll scrub, you'll cook, you'll do exactly as you're told. And if you try to leave before I say so, you won't see a single cent. Is that clear? She swallowed the lump in her throat. Clear. Good, he said, his smirk widening. Get inside. Mrs. Larkin will put you to work. The housekeeper was a woman with a face as sharp and unforgiving as a shard of glass. She handed Emma a bucket and a lye-soaked rag. Kitchen floor, she snapped. Then the porch. Get used to being on your knees. It's where you'll spend most of your time here. By nightfall, Emma's back was a knot of fire, and her hands were raw and bleeding. She collapsed onto the thin straw mattress in a tiny windowless attic room. This wasn't just hard work. This was a prison. She pulled the second handkerchief from her pocket, the one she'd made for herself. The cloth was soft, the stitches neat. She pressed it to her lips, a silent prayer whispered into the dark. Mama, hold on. Just hold on. The next day was worse, and the day after that, it got even worse still. The work was endless. The food was scraps, and the air was thick with a quiet menace that never went away. One of the ranch hands, a man with mean little eyes, started following her. He'd corner her in the pantry, his breath hot and stale on her neck. She'd push him away, her heart hammering with terror, and he'd just laugh. Carlson owns you, little bird, he'd sneer. That means we all get a taste. She told Mrs. Larkin. The housekeeper just gave her a flat, dead look. Keep to yourself. Learn to be invisible. It's your only hope. But the worst part was Carlson. He wouldn't touch her. He would just watch. He'd stand in a doorway as she scrubbed the floors, a cruel smile playing on his lips. It was a game to him. He was enjoying her misery. He was savoring her fear. She was trapped. Utterly and completely trapped. And every night she would lie on her straw mattress, clutching her handkerchief, and wonder if anyone in the world even knew she was still alive. Hank knew. He knew something was wrong. One day she was a quiet presence at the edge of his world, a glimpse by the creek, a silent nod in town. The next she was just gone. The unease started as a low hum and grew into a sharp, insistent alarm. He lingered in town, his ears open. It didn't take long. He was at the blacksmith's watching the smithy hammer a hot piece of iron into a horseshoe. Heard John Callahan finally sold off his daughter, the smithy said between ringing blows. Sent her up to Carlson's place to work off his debts. Another man spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. Work off debts? Carlson don't have workers, he has prisoners. Poor girl. She won't last. The words hit Hank like a physical blow. Carlson. The name was poison. The ranch was a scar on land his people had once called home. That night he moved through the trees at the edge of Carlson's property, a shadow in the dusk. He watched the lanterns flicker on. He saw the ranch hands laughing and drinking on the porch. And then he saw her. Emma. She was carrying a heavy bucket, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. She dropped to her knees and began to scrub the porch boards, her movements slow and painful. This wasn't the girl who had left the clumsy handkerchief. This was a ghost, a hollowed-out version of her, being erased one day at a time. Then he saw the other man, the one with the mean eyes. He saw him lean down and whisper something in her ear. He saw her flinch, her whole body going rigid with fear. And he saw Carlson, watching from the doorway, that same cruel smile on his face. Rage, cold and pure, settled deep in Hank's bones. He stayed until the lights went out, until she disappeared back into the darkness of the house. Then he slipped back into the trees, his purpose as clear and hard as a shard of obsidian. He went back to his camp by the creek and emptied his leather pouch onto a blanket. Pelt after pelt of fox and beaver. A silver wolf hide, a rare and valuable prize. A small stack of silver dollars. And last, a necklace of turquoise beads. It had been his mother's. It was the only thing he had left of her. He looked at the small pile of his life's work, his memories, his entire worth in the white man's world. He thought of Emma on her knees, the fear in her eyes. The choice wasn't a choice at all. He packed it all into a deerskin sack. He had lived his life in silence, letting the world take what it wanted from him and his people. But not this, and not her. He would not let the world take her. 2 nights later, Emma was scrubbing the long dining hall floor, her body aching with a weariness that went bone deep. She was so tired she almost didn't hear the voices from Carlson's office. The door was cracked open just a sliver. It was Carlson and the town sheriff, a man named Gable. Their voices were low, laced with whiskey and contempt. "The old Callahan debt is almost paid," Gable was saying, his voice slurring slightly. "What are you going to do when the girl's term is up?" Carlson let out a harsh laugh. "Her term is up when I say it is. Besides, the girl is just the start. It's the land I want. Once her mother finally kicks off, old man Callahan will drink himself into the grave inside of a month. The property will be mine. The original claim was fraudulent anyway. Everyone knows it." "Still," Gable mumbled, "the deed is in his name." "Deeds can be lost," Carlson said, his voice turning cold and sharp. "Fires happen, especially to the cabins of lonely old drunks." Emma's blood ran cold. He wasn't just going to keep her. He was going to take everything. He was going to let her mother die and then destroy her father to get their small, worthless patch of dirt. She backed away from the door, her heart a frantic bird beating against her ribs. She had to get out. She had to warn them. But how? The place was a fortress, and she was its prisoner. She fled to her attic room, her mind screaming. She was packing her few belongings, her hands shaking so badly she could barely fold her spare dress, when she heard a commotion from the yard below. Horses, a single rider. She crept to the small, grimy window and peered out. Her heart stopped. It was Hank. He was riding up to the porch as calm as if he were paying a social call. He dismounted, a heavy deerskin sack slung over his shoulder. Carlson stepped out onto the porch, wiping grease from his mouth with the back of his hand. "Well, well," he drawled. "Look what the wind blew in. Come to trade, Apache." Hank didn't say a word. He just dropped the heavy sack on the porch boards. It landed with a solid, definitive thud. "I've come for the girl," Hank said, his voice low and even. Carlson laughed, a loud, ugly sound. "The Callahan shit? She's mine now. What's it to you? Let her go, Hank said. That's your payment. More than enough. Carlson's eyes glittered with greed. He opened the sack, his thick fingers plunging in, pulling out the pelts, the coins, the turquoise necklace. I'll be damned, he chuckled, weighing the sack in his hand. Never thought I'd see the day. Fine, take her. She's not worth half this anyway. He turned and yelled her name. Emma scrambled down the stairs, her mind reeling. She burst out onto the porch and saw Hank, standing there like a pillar of stone. Carlson gave a mock bow. You're free to go, little bird. Don't say I never did you any favors. She walked toward Hank, not daring to believe it was real. But just as she reached his side, Carlson spoke again, his voice dripping with venom. On second thought, he said, a slow, evil grin spreading across his face. I think I'll keep the payment. And the girl. The ranch hands who had been lounging on the rail straightened up, their hands drifting toward the pistols at their hips. Sheriff Gable appeared in the doorway, behind Carlson, his face flushed with whiskey, a smirk on his lips. It was a trap. Hank hadn't moved a muscle. He just stood there, his eyes locked on Carlson. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with violence. Emma's breath was trapped in her throat. This was it. This was how they were going to die. That necklace, Hank said, his voice still quiet, but now it had an edge like sharpened flint. The one your fingers are wrapped around. Ask your friend the sheriff where it came from. Carlson frowned, confused. What are you talking about? Ask him, Hank repeated, his gaze flicking to Gable. The sheriff's face went pale. All the drunken confidence drained out of him, leaving behind a slack-jawed fear. Gable? Carlson said, turning. What's he talking about? It was a long time ago, the sheriff stammered, his eyes wide. A raid. Up on the reservation. Some things went missing. Hank took a slow step forward. That was my mother's necklace. She was wearing it the day Deputy Gable and his men rode through our village. The day she died. A new terrible understanding dawned on Carlson's face. This wasn't just a trade. This was a reckoning. Having a trinket stolen from a dead Indian woman was one thing. Having the town sheriff, a man in his pocket, exposed as a murderer and a thief? That was something else entirely. That could bring federal marshals. That could ruin everything. Carlson looked from Gable's terrified face to Hank's cold, unyielding stare. The greedy smirk was gone, replaced by a twitchy nervousness. He let go of the necklace as if it had burned him. A misunderstanding, he blustered, trying to regain control. Take the girl. Go on. Get out of here. He shoved the deerskin sack toward Hank with his boot. Hank didn't even glance at it. He just looked at Emma. Come, he said. And she went. She walked past the stunned ranch hands, past the terrified sheriff, past the furious, defeated rancher. She didn't look back. Hank helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. They rode away from the ranch, the sound of Carlson's impotent rage fading behind them. They rode in silence for a long time, the steady rhythm of the horse a comforting presence in the vast starry night. Emma was trembling, the horror of the last few weeks and the shock of the last few minutes washing over her in waves. What you said, she finally whispered, her voice hoarse. About the sheriff, about your mother. Was it true? The arms around her tightened, just slightly. Yes. She processed that, the casual brutality of it, the quiet, decades-long pain he must have carried. He gave it all back, she said, thinking of the sack of pelts and silver. Everything you own. It's just stuff, he said, his voice a low rumble against her back. It's not everything. She leaned back against his chest, exhausted and overwhelmed, and feeling for the first time in a very long time, safe. But as they rode closer to home, a new fear began to take hold. The fear of what she had to tell her father. The fear of a truth that might be even uglier than Carlson's greed. The cabin was dark when they arrived, save for a single lamp burning in the window. Her father was on the porch, a silhouette against the yellow light. He saw them coming, and he stood up, his posture rigid with anger. You! He roared as Hank helped Emma down. What devil's business is this? Bringing my daughter back in the middle of the night? Papa, stop, Emma said, her voice shaking but firm. He saved me. Saved you, he spat. From what? Honest work? It wasn't honest work, she cried, the dam of her control finally breaking. He's a monster, Papa. Carlson, he was going to keep me there forever. He was going to wait for Mama to die, and then take our land. Her father flinched as if she'd struck him. That's nonsense, lies. Is it? Emma took a step closer, her eyes burning into his. I heard him, Papa. I heard him talking to Sheriff Gable. He said the original claim was fraudulent. He said everyone knows it. What did he mean, Papa? What fraudulent claim? John Callahan's face went ashen. The anger drained away, replaced by a deep, hollow-eyed shame. He stumbled back, shaking his head. You don't know what you're talking about. Then tell me, she screamed, tears streaming down her face. Tell me why you were so afraid of him. Tell me why he wants our land so badly that he would destroy our family to get it. What did you do? He collapsed onto the porch steps, his face in his hands. His shoulders shook with dry, ragged sobs. I didn't have a choice, he whispered, his voice muffled. I was young, desperate. The cabin door opened. Emma's mother stood there leaning heavily on the frame, her eyes filled with a weary sorrow. Tell her, John, she said, her voice faint but clear. Tell her the truth. John Callahan looked up, his face a mask of misery. He looked at Emma. He looked at Hank, who stood silent and watchful in the shadows. It wasn't my claim to begin with, he confessed, the words tearing out of him. I had a partner, a good man, better than me. We struck silver up in the hills, a small vein, but enough. Enough to change everything. He took a shaky breath. But Carlson's father found out. He wanted it all. He threatened me, said he'd ruin me. So I signed the claim over to myself. I cut my partner out. I told him the vein had run dry. I took everything. Who? Emma whispered, though she already knew the answer. Who was your partner? Her father's gaze finally, painfully, lifted to meet Hank's. His father, he choked out. My partner was Samuel Blackwood. I stole from him. I let Carlson's family run him and his people off this land, and I built this miserable life on that lie. The silence that followed was absolute. The chirping of the crickets, the rustle of the cottonwoods, it all fell away. There was only the weight of a decades-old sin, heavy and suffocating in the night air. Emma stared at her father, the man she knew, and saw a stranger. A weak, frightened man who had betrayed his friend and condemned his own family to a life of poverty and shame, all while nursing a secret, guilty hatred for the son of the man he'd wronged. Hank hadn't moved. His face was unreadable, carved from stone. He had come here tonight to save the daughter, and in doing so, he had uncovered the truth about the father, the truth that had destroyed his own. Emma felt the world tilt on its axis. Her father's drinking, his bitterness, his irrational rage at Hank, it all snapped into focus. It wasn't prejudice, it was guilt. A guilt so corrosive it had eaten him alive from the inside out for 20 years. She looked at Hank, standing so still in the yard. He had every right to hate them, every right to demand justice or vengeance. His entire life had been shaped by the cowardly act of the man weeping on the porch steps. But Hank's face held no hatred, only a profound, quiet sorrow. He walked slowly forward, his boots silent in the dust, and stopped in front of her father. John Callahan flinched, cowering like a beaten dog. He expected a blow, a curse. Instead, Hank crouched down, meeting his gaze. The silver is long gone, Hank said, his voice level. The past cannot be unwritten, but the lie can end. The land was never yours to hold. The deed is the last piece of the theft. He stood up and looked from John to Emma's mother, who was now weeping silently in the doorway. The debt isn't to me, he said. It's to the truth. You have to make it right. And with that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the cottonwood grove, leaving the fractured family to sit in the ruins of their own making. The days that followed were heavy with a silence that was louder than all the shouting had ever been. John Callahan didn't touch a drop of whiskey. He seemed to shrink. The bluster and rage burned out of him, leaving behind a frail, hollowed-out old man. He spent hours just sitting on the porch, staring at his hands as if he didn't recognize them. Emma's mother, strangely, began to improve. With the poison of the secret gone, it was as if her body finally had permission to heal. She started eating more, the color returning to her cheeks. She and Emma didn't talk about what had happened. There were no words for it yet, but a new fragile understanding grew between them. Hank did not return. The gifts on the porch stopped. The silent, steady presence at the edge of their lives was gone. His absence was a constant, aching void. Emma told herself it was for the best. He had his justice. He had the truth. He had no reason to ever look at them again. One morning, a week after that terrible night, her father stood up from the porch steps. "I'm going to town," he said, his voice raspy from disuse. He hitched up their old horse to the rickety wagon and left without another word. Emma watched him go, a knot of fear tightening in her stomach. She was afraid he was going to the saloon, afraid he had finally broken completely. He was gone all day. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange, she saw the wagon returning. He pulled up to the cabin and climbed down. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear. He walked over to where Emma stood by the fence. He held out a piece of paper. It was a legal document, a new deed. The land, the cabin, everything was now signed over to its rightful owner, Henry Blackwood. "It's done," her father said. "It's not enough. It'll never be enough, but it's a start." That night, for the first time Emma could remember, her father ate dinner with them at the table. He didn't say much, but he was there. And as they sat in the quiet lamplight, a feeling she hadn't realized was missing slowly began to return. It felt almost like peace. A few days later, the sheriff's buggy came barreling down the road, kicking up a plume of dust. But it wasn't Sheriff Gable inside. It was a U.S. Marshal, a stern-looking man with a gray mustache and cold, clear eyes. He had questions for her father. John Callahan, without hesitation, told him everything. He told him about the fraudulent claim. He told him about the threats from Carlson's father. And he told him about the new deed, the one that proved the original crime. The marshal listened, nodding slowly. When her father was finished, the marshal tipped his hat. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Callahan. It seems Mr. Carlson has a great deal to answer for." News traveled fast in a valley that small. Carlson was arrested. His land, bought with stolen money and held through intimidation, was seized by the federal government. Sheriff Gable was stripped of his badge and charged as an accomplice. His crimes against Hank's people finally brought into the light. The town, which had once whispered about Emma and sneered at Hank, was now buzzing with a different story, a story of a long-hidden crime, of justice finally served. The Callahans were no longer the town pariahs. They were just a family trying to piece itself back together. Autumn arrived, turning the cottonwood leaves to shimmering gold. Emma's mother was strong enough to sit on the porch in the afternoons. Her father started working again, taking odd jobs, his hands slowly remembering the feel of honest labor. The cabin felt lighter, but for Emma there was still a piece missing. A quiet man who had sacrificed everything for her, uncovered a terrible truth, and then simply walked away. She didn't know if she would ever see him again. Then one evening, as the sun was setting, she saw a figure walking out of the cottonwood grove. It was Hank. He stopped at the edge of their property, by the fence line he now legally owned. He just stood there, watching the house. Emma's heart leaped into her throat. She wiped her hands on her apron, her fingers automatically searching for the comfort of the handkerchief in her pocket. The second one, the one she'd kept. She walked across the yard, her steps slow and deliberate. She stopped in front of him, the fence between them. "Hank," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He just looked at her, his dark eyes holding a question. She took a deep breath, pulling the folded square of cloth from her pocket. Her hands were shaking. "I made this," she said, her voice trembling. "A long time ago. I kept it." She held it out to him, through the space in the fence. He looked at the handkerchief, then back at her. For a long moment he didn't move. Then slowly, he reached out and took it from her. He unfolded it, his rough fingers tracing the wildflower she had stitched in the corner. He didn't say anything. Instead, he reached for the leather pouch at his own hip, the one he always carried. He opened it and drew something out. Emma gasped. It was the first handkerchief. The clumsy, crooked one she had left in the grass all those months ago. The fabric was frayed, the threads darkened with time, but it was unmistakably hers. You, you kept it, she breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. All this time, a faint, sad smile touched his lips. From the day you left it. But I thought you were asleep, she whispered, the world seeming to spin around her. No, he said softly. I wasn't. The truth of it, the simple, profound weight of it, hit her all at once. His silence hadn't been indifference. It had been a shield, protecting her, waiting for her. Tears blurred her vision. Why? She asked. Why did you do all of this? For me? For my family, after everything? Because, he said, his voice low and sure, some things are worth more than what a man can carry in a sack. Some things are worth fighting for. He looked down at the two handkerchiefs, one in each of his hands, one a clumsy, fearful offering, the other a secret, steadfast hope, two pieces of a story that had finally found its ending. And now, Emma whispered, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. Is the time right? He looked up, and his eyes, for the first time, were not guarded or sad. They were clear, and they were filled with a promise that needed no words. He nodded. Now. He opened the gate, and she stepped through. They didn't walk back to the cabin. They walked together, down to the cottonwood grove, to the place where it had all begun. The air was cool and smelled of dry leaves and rich earth. Beneath the largest tree, they sat, the two small handkerchiefs lying on the ground between them. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and a long, shuddering breath escaped her. It was the breath she felt she'd been holding her entire life. They were two lonely people from two different worlds, brought together by a kindness, torn apart by a lie, and bound forever by the truth. The past was full of ghosts, but here, together, they could finally build a future. Thank you for staying with me through Emma and Hank's journey. If their story of courage and quiet love moved you, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support allows me to keep finding and sharing stories like this one, and it truly means the world. I'll see you in the next one.